Take number 3. Volume turned on. Let's go. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Lion's Head landings and how you can give yourself sufficient altitude and time to do a nice landing. Where does this come from? The other day, Edward had his first Lion's Head flight. He did do my recommended downwind base finals approach, but didn't do such a good job on the base and finals. So let's just talk a little bit in general what happens here. You take off from Lion's Head, fly ahead Lion's Head, have a happy day, and decide it's time to come and land. The wind is in the southwesterly direction, so it's blowing as I'm moving this mouse over here. And what you want to do when you come and land is come out over the water, lose your altitude out here, and then do a downwind, base, and final leg. So the downwind, I'm typically coming over the water, turning my base leg onto the rocks, and that base leg you want to turn is coming along this line over here. This is the border between the landing field and the tennis court. So you've got the road, the house, these trees. This border over here is the line you want to take. So let's talk a little bit of what happened with Edward. Edward had a harder than usual landing, or than desired landing. It wasn't ridiculous, but it could have been better. So what did he do? So on his flight, he did a downwind, he did the base leg, but the base leg actually came across the field somewhere out here. Then he was too high, so he threw in another turn. Still too high. One more turn, and shortly after finishing this turn, he flared. Coming into the turn, so he did a right-hand turn because he's landing in this direction here. So he was coming across, he turns to the right, has about 40 to 50% right brake on, and then finishes the flare with the left hand. And because he essentially didn't really have a proper final leg there, but that 50 to 40 to 50% brake that he had on coming into the flare took away a lot of airspeed. And so when he flared with the opposite hand and completed the flare on both hands, he didn't start with a lot of airspeed, and that's why the landing was vertically harder than desired. So what you want to do with all of your landings is always come in with maximum speed. Speed is your friend, airspeed is your friend. You come in with maximum airspeed and you flare when it is the right time to flare. Now, let's talk a little bit about accuracy and where you want to land. This is the landing field. If I take the length of the landing field over here, starting from this embankment, and let's stop it on the other embankment that's sloping down to the fence down here, split it into 3, and where you draw those two ones, like the first third line, there'll be a first third and a second third, where you draw the first third line from your approach direction. That first third line is where you want to land. So for Lion's Head, you should be aiming to land round about here, somewhere over here, and that'll give you lots of space if you do overshoot to overshoot, and if you do undershoot, you still got space over here between the embankment and this target to undershoot. Cool. All right, now that we know where we want to land, where should we be doing our last turn to go on to finals? Now, the thing about Lion's Head is that you can't do a very long finals. You can't do a long finals because a long finals will mean that you are setting up deeper over the tennis courts. We're not supposed to fly over the tennis courts. But also, even if we were allowed to fly over the tennis courts, it's kind of a crap place to be because the tennis courts themselves are major hazards with poles and fences and stuff. The houses over here, major hazards. And going further beyond, you'll be going into Rota in the back here, going into Clifton. So you don't want to fly this path over the tennis courts. The ideal base leg for me to take is, like I described earlier, you do your downwind over the water, you turn base somewhere out here, and you bring your base leg over the edge of the landing field. So you could be coming over the trees, over the house, over this road. If you're comfortable to come over the poles over here, you could do that. But you want to do your base leg out here so that you can turn onto finals. Now, how high would you need to be? How high would you need to be to make this final turn over here to get to this point? We can do some simple maths here. So I'm going to turn on this ruler function and There we go. Let's measure the distance. So I said I wanted to land somewhere out here. If I measure the distance here to this fence where the tennis court is, it's about 60 meters. Okay, so 60 meters. When you're coming in with your hands up and you're flying into wind, you probably have a glide ratio of 1:5, 1:6, somewhere there. The stronger the wind, the worse your glide ratio will be. You can play with this. If you want to know what your glide ratio is, look at some of your track logs that you've recorded with whatever app, and you can see what your various glide ratios tend to be in no wind and so on. Into wind, no wind, whatever. Okay, so I'm just letting you know that your glide ratio is going to be in not too strong wind of year, so a little bit of a headwind, maybe 10 k's an hour. You're probably going to have a glide ratio of 1:6, maybe 1:5, something like that. Okay, so this distance over here, let's round it off, it's 60 meters. If I wanted to land at this point, and I've got a 1:6 glide ratio, that means from there, I should be 10 meters above ground level when I finish my turn. When I turn from base onto finals over here, I should be at about 10 meters above the landing field, so that at that 1:6 glide ratio, I will then glide 60 meters and land over here. Cool. Sorry, just thinking a little bit here. 10 meters. How high is 10 meters? This embankment here is probably 5 meters. Then you can put another 5 meters for these trees or so. So 10 meters is roughly the top of where these poles are, roughly. So that means if you did your turn just above the top of the poles, that altitude there, out here, you should be lining up for a landing around about there. And you can apply this methodology elsewhere. Other landing fields, however long that distance is, you can think about the base leg, what distance you have between that base leg and your target, and that'll give you the altitude you should be turning at. Okay, so we're looking at about 10 to, let's say, 15 meters above the landing field around here at this point here. Now, my tip for you is when you are coming on this base leg, imagine that you have these, let's call them entry gates here, where you're going to start your turn. You want to come through these gates, do your turn, and go onto this target. So when I'm flying my base leg over here, I'm judging, am I going to be where I want to be at this point at 10 meters above the landing field, 5 meters probably above this tarmac. So when I'm flying my base leg over here, if I think I'm going to be high, then if I'm going to be very high, then whatever. I can do things to lose altitude. I can do big ears. I can do some zigzags out here. I can do tricks to lose altitude. If I was super high, then maybe I could just throw in a figure of 8 over here, a quick figure of 8, and then bring it back. So you can use whatever tricks you want to lose that altitude. But what you're doing is you're aiming to position yourself that when you make this turn over here, you ideally set up to go onto that target. If while you're flying across this line on your base leg, you think to yourself, oh, I've screwed it up, I'm going to hit the cars, or I'm going to hit the trees or the poles, whatever, that means you're going to be short. It's pretty simple. Just turn earlier. Instead of hitting anything, just turn and you will land on the field, probably somewhere out here. If you are going to hit these trees over here, you were that low that you were going to hit the trees, and you turn, you'd be landing somewhere out there. So you can just cut the corner when you think you're low. And when you're high, throw in a big ears. And you can lose your altitude, set you up for this corner piece over here, and then you're good, and then you go and land. So yeah, that's how I would do this landing approach. I never ever fly over the tennis courts over here. I always fly this line, and whilst I'm flying over the base leg, then I'm judging my altitude. Am I going to be optimally positioned to go for that corner? Am I going to be short? And if I'm going to be short, I'll turn earlier. Is there any traffic? Is there somebody coming, some other tourist who decided to come from behind and cut through over here that I need to evade? So I'm evaluating all of those things. But just on a normal, non-evasive approach, landing approach, that is what I described just now. Is you want to take this line over here, over the border edge of the landing field, turning at about 10 meters above the landing field at that altitude over here, and then you'll be gliding for 60 meters, which will put you somewhere over here. Sweet. Have fun.